from the Hamas perspective. It's not that we care so much about their perspective, but they'll get to a point where they simply don't have anything left to bargain. And the IDF stops, or not the IDF, but the Israelis stop negotiating and just focus on the complete annihilation of Hamas.
Hello and welcome to the Trump Report. I'm Louis Sykes. This time we're joined by former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, Mick Mulroy. Mick, welcome.
Great to be with you, Louis.
I wanted to start with how you've seen the US reacting to the resumption of fighting in Gaza.
So certainly, I think the United States would like to see a permanent ceasefire and move on to the reconstruction of Gaza, as I would hope the whole region does. The issue was apparently that the U.S. proposed that the extension of the first phase happen, which of course would keep hostages coming out, Palestinian prisoners released, and humanitarian assistance going in at scale. But apparently Hamas rejected that. They, of course, would like to see this move into the second phase, which would see the Israeli Defense Forces withdraw and essentially be the end of the war. For many reasons, security and political, that just wasn't going to happen from the Israeli perspective. They saw two ministers leave just because of the ceasefire itself, and essentially the coalition government would collapse if they were going to remove the IDF without having a suitable replacement security force, both for the people inside Gaza and the people in Israel. So that was the issue, and that bridging proposal that would extend the first phase, I think, is still something that's being focused on by the U.S. administration, hopefully the Israelis, and hopefully Hamas, because this current situation is very dire. There's not humanitarian aid getting in, and that has caused a crisis to get even worse.
And is there any hope at this point for a resumption of that previous ceasefire?
Certainly, the first phase saw a lot of things that are obviously positive on both sides. Hostages, which never should have been taken in the first place, would be coming out, including an Israeli American. That's what the U.S. is focused on, but certainly all of them coming out. And the humanitarian aid going in. I mean, they cut about 97%, this is the latest, are on the verge of complete food insecurity, so famine. Their power has even been cut out, what is used, of course, to run the desalination plants to make clean water. So this all needs to happen. It's in Hamas's decision to make this happen. They're just going to have to accept that they're not going to get an end of the war, which would see any element of Hamas remaining in power. That's just not acceptable to the Israelis.
And we discussed there the US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff's bridge plan, which had been presented last week, I believe. That's still on the table, as you say, as a way of ceasing hostilities, I believe, until April. I mean, do we know what are the details of this newer proposal?
So my understanding, it would be an extension of the first phase. So the points of the first phase would remain in effect. It was about a 3-to-1. Prisoners come out, or excuse me, hostages come out, one, and three Palestinian prisoners are then released. Also, and this was the case during the 2-month ceasefire, large amounts of humanitarian aid going in, both food, clean water, critical medicines also go in. So if that happens, then we would go back to that. And the longer these ceasefires last, the more likely they will continue to last. And of course, during that time is when the long term discussions, negotiations, if you will, to end the fighting, which would be the second phase, can happen. They could be a suitable replacement for the Israeli Defense Forces, whether it's a multinational force, whether it's a large amount of Palestinians that have been vetted and are trusted that could be trained to do this. That seems to me to be more plausible, or in even a private security company, which I don't know is necessarily the best alternative. But certainly, the alternative that isn't acceptable to Israel, whether you're on the right, left, or center, is for Hamas to stay in power and have the ability, of course, eventually to reconstitute itself and launch another attack on Israel. So that's the biggest, I think, pole in the tent, so to speak, with how we could get to an end of the conflict. and transition through stage two and then into stage three, which is the reconstruction.
And what do we know of the renewed fighting so far? I mean, this is a full ground operation by the Israelis against Hamas, is it?
Yes. So I think during the interim period, obviously the 2 month of the ceasefire, the intelligence doesn't stop. So whether it's Mossad or Shin Bet or both, likely, they focused on what would happen if we ended the ceasefire and we restarted, the actual major combat operations. And that's what we saw from the north, central, and south. Very deliberate attacks, taking out what's left of the Hamas leadership, really focusing on their capabilities. And until this enters into another phase where the fighting stops, Israel is going to keep focusing on that. And there's even a talk inside the Israeli national security apparatus to increase the capacity of the IDF substantially in Gaza so that they could essentially annihilate Hamas, or to the point that they realistically can, uh, over this period of fighting. So this is obviously something Hamas should be focused on. And if they enter into the extended first phase, it would be, of course, better for all. But the longer this keeps going, the less they will have to negotiate with on the other side.
And so there is still this belief that Hamas can be destroyed militarily on the ground, as it were.
So, in military terms, you talk about an ideology as perverted as it is, it's an ideology, and you can't necessarily defeat that militarily. Certainly, you can kill the leadership, you can kill the troops, if you will. You can destroy their tunnel system, which is one of the bigger strategic advantages they had in this. And of course, you can destroy the armories and ammunition that they have and prevent it from being resupplied. So those are all doable things, not easy, but doable things under the military paradigm. And I think that's what they're going to focus on, not the idea that there'll ever be a day where somebody won't wave the Hamas flag or put on the Hamas uniform. That's an impossible military task to actually facilitate. But they can get them to a point where they're just no longer militarily effective and can pose no threat to Israel. That is what I think the IDF is focused on.
The resumption of fighting, is that likely to put pressure on Hamas to sign this bridge deal, or to agree to a further ceasefire? Or is this level of chaos actually something that they can use themselves?
I think it will put more pressure on them. And the longer they go without food into Gaza, and we can certainly discuss the legalities of that. You can't use the provision of humanitarian aid as a weapon of war. But from Hamas' perspective, they claim to be, concerned about the plight of the Palestinian people in Gaza. I have seen very little evidence to support that, but now we're seeing even less. And the longer it goes on, the closer they're going to get to whatever is remaining of this leadership. And they're essentially going to keep degrading them. I don't know. It's very difficult, but it's probably around 50% of what they started when this war kicked off. But it's going down. It's certainly not going up. They can recruit new recruits, of course. That's not difficult for them. But these major weapon systems that can actually reach into and damage or destroy parts of Israel and certainly kill Israelis, that's going to become less and less. And also, that's one of the reasons why the Israelis were so keen on controlling the Rafah corridor. They don't want to see Hamas get rearmed, and they got to come from somewhere. They're not making most of these munitions and weapon systems internal to Gaza. So cutting that off would prevent them from really having the ability to attack Israel in the future.
And is this new offensive by the Israelis? uh, Is there a sign that they are also trying to put pressure on Hamas to come back to the table, to come back to the idea of a ceasefire? Or is this a purely military thing that they have got military targets that they're trying to achieve with this new offensive?
So they're going to focus on the military targets. That's essentially what militaries are good at. it will put pressure on whoever's making the decisions. It's probably unclear to many right now, which could cause a lot of issues when it comes to these negotiations because the Israelis and the Americans and the Qataris and the Egyptians that are facilitating this don't necessarily know who's making the ultimate decisions, and even if they get to an agreement, will it be adhered to, which is also a problem for all the negotiations here. But I do think they're going to put more pressure, and that will cause Hamas to want to go into the back into the first phase of the ceasefire. The problem, I guess, from the Hamas perspective, it's not that we care so much about their perspective, but they'll get to a point where they simply don't have anything left to bargain. And the IDF stops, or not the IDF, but the Israelis stop negotiating and just focus on the complete annihilation of Hamas, which, from the Israeli perspective, is what's necessary. They just, of course, have to deal with the hostages and how to get them and recover them in a way that's militarily acceptable. But ultimately, it is much safer for the hostages to come out through a diplomatically negotiated settlement. But if you don't have a partner in that negotiation, then the only other way is through military means.
And speaking to Tucker Carlson yesterday, Steve Witkoff said he does believe a dialogue with Hamas can end the war. But he also added to that that Hamas cannot be left in charge of Gaza. I mean, are Hamas ever going to agree to reduce their presence in Gaza at the negotiating table in that way?
So that's a very good point, Louis, because we're asking Hamas to basically negotiate themselves out of, maybe not out of existence, but certainly out of any influence in the future of Gaza. So that's unlikely to happen. Their whole purpose, of course, was to control Gaza and to attack Israel. So I think negotiating with them in conjunction with the Israelis is necessary to get the hostages out and ultimately to end the war. But the negotiations long term needs to be with a element that's at least tentatively deemed as acceptable as a replacement for Hamas in terms of political leadership and security, so that we're actually talking to the people that we want to see run Gaza at the end of this, because Hamas is never going to be a viable partner to talk themselves out of any influence in the future of Gaza.
It appears the Trump administration sees a deal with Iran as a solution to the hostility we're seeing in the Middle East. Does this resumption of fighting make that deal easier or harder, do you think?
So I think the Trump administration, and if you focus also on the current escalation with the Houthis, we are surging assets to the region. They've retasked the USS Carl Vinson, which is a aircraft carrier strike group from the Pacific to the Middle East to join the USS Harry Truman. There's a lot of reports of other assets coming into the region. It looks like the U.S. is going to try to go straight at the Houthis in a much more substantial way than the Biden administration. One, to mitigate that threat, which is a global threat. It challenges commercial shipping from the region to the rest of the world, but also to send a message to Iran that they can see all this military capability that's being utilized in one of their proxy forces in Yemen. They could be next. And I think the next part is becoming more and more possible. And why I say that is it is the Trump administration's public position that they would like to see the negotiations for a JCPOA, or a nuclear agreement part 2 or 2.0. That was summarily rejected um, by the Ayatollah. They want to see that start. I'm sure they also want to include this malign activity, this proxy force support that Iran does, but they want to get into a nuclear agreement that's more enduring and one that covers all the issues of Iran. So, what's in it for Iran? They could see substantial, if not complete, sanction relief, which would be very good for the Iranian people, who are very capable and likely to do very well if they were unhindered by those restrictions. But I think the Trump administration is wanting to see that, but they think they're also preparing for direct military action should Iran break out and try to gain nuclear weapons, which does seem to be the direction they're heading.
And we know that Iran, I mean, it would be an understatement to say, did not have a good time in the with its involvement in the conflict in Gaza. Um, are they going to be unhappy to see this hostility resume?
Well, there's been reports that Iran's diplomacy right now is trying to get their proxy forces to calm down, particularly the Houthis, which are probably the least directed by Iran. They, of course, support them. That's where they get all these uh, missiles and drones, both aerial and maritime, that are attacking all these. But it's clear that Iran has lost big time when it comes to their strategic interests in the region. They've seen Hezbollah, their number one proxy, which they actually started, get decimated. They saw Hamas, what's going right now. They're at least to 50%, and their leadership is annihilated. They saw the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, which cut off one of their major platforms. They saw Israel attack them without really any substantial resistance that they could mount. They've seen their integrated air and missile defense in the same sequence get destroyed. And basically, we're proven to be a paper tiger when it comes to conventional military force. So this has been a loss, and a loss for Iran. They can come to the negotiation table, seek a new agreement, which would be beneficial to the Iranian people, or they could go toward a nuclear weapon. But I do think if that's the case, from everything that's being said, including this morning by the U.S. National Security Advisor, that this will not end well for them, that the U.S. will look at ensuring that Iran will never have a nuclear weapon.
And you mentioned that Iran might maybe trying to get their proxies to calm down, as it were, to reduce their hostilities. A Houthi missile was shot down yesterday, heading towards Israel. I mean, previously we saw the US setting up aerial defenses alongside other allies to protect Israel from those sorts of attacks. Is that likely to resume now?
Yes, good question, and I think the answer is yes. In fact, the U.S. officially put out that we'll take the Houthis. You focus on fighting Hamas. And I think the actions speak that the words were accurate. As this is, we're seeing a lot of resources go to the region. I think we'll see a lot more. The Houthis should be certainly concerned. They likely won't be, but that their entire leadership chain of command could be taken out. Once the U.S. intelligence focuses on an area, it does take a while to collect the kind of information to be really military effective, but I think they are concentrating on Yemen, and they will get to where these individuals are located. And if there's any country military in the world that can get to those, it's the U.S. military. So this is something I think the U.S. is ready to take on. But again, it's not just about the Houthis. It certainly is in part, but it's also about sending a clear message to Iran that their willingness to basically supply a group like the Houthis that can attack U.S. I mean, any given day, one of these missiles is going to hit a target, and it could be a U.S. destroyer. I mean, I saw stats this morning that just the trip that the one of the U.S. destroyers made through the Red Sea was attacked over 100 times. So no matter how good you are, one of these missiles or drones is going to hit, and if they kill American sailors, this is going to escalate far beyond where the Houthis, I think, would want it to. So this is important for the United States, but it's also important to send a message to Iran. Because if Iran goes and gets a nuclear weapon and is allowed to, there's going to be a nuclear arms race in the Middle East for sure.
And what reaction have we seen from the wider Middle East? And is the US seeking to engage with other partners in the region over this resumption of the conflict?
Yes, I think the U.S. would be talking to our partners who obviously would like to see an end to the war in Gaza, but so would the United States. Part of that is the need for other countries to be part of the solution. It's easy to have commentary on the current conflict. It's less easy to talk about a multinational force that could keep the peace if there was a withdrawal of IDF. It's also not as easy to talk about the $53 billion in reconstruction, which is what is expected to the baseline of what it's going to cost to reconstruct the Gaza Strip. So this is going to require partners in the region to step up in a very big way. It looks like they are willing to do so from the agreement, or at least the proposal that came out of Cairo. That's a good thing. But the U.S. is probably talking about the end of this war, what comes next, and of course the issues with all our partners in the region.
Well, Mick Mulroy, thank you very much for joining me today on the Trump Report.
Thanks, Louis.